All right, good morning, everybody. Difficult morning today, but let us continue with our limud. We got up to the Mishnah. We're in Masechet Beit Adaf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. We got up to the Mishnah. It's about halfway down the Amud. We nearly finished the parak. The Mishnah says, "Shlosha dvarim Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah matir v'chachamim osrim." There are three things which Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah was maker, which he allowed, and Chachamim said no. Said is asur. Number one. Parato yotzah be'otzva sheben karnea. His cow would go out with a strap in between its horns. Machloket as to whether that is considered a burden or that is a problem of shvitat be'ema or not. Rabbi Elazar said that was okay, and Chachamim said no. Mekardin et be'ema. You can comb the animal. Again, it's got to do with whether you're going to injure the animal. You're not intending to, but when you comb it, the teeth may cause a wound on the animal, the teeth of the comb. When Makardin, Rashi says, this is with a metal comb that has thinner teeth. Okay, so Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said that is okay. Chachamim said no. We'll see just now. The Mishnah will add another detail to that. And you can grind. You can use this pepper grinder on Yom Tov. רבי יהודה אומר, אין מקדין את הבהמה ביום טוב, מפני שעושה חבורה, אבל מקרצפין. So here Rabbi Yehuda says, ein makardin. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said makardin. He says, no, you can't do that. You can't comb with a metal comb. But Mekatzafin, right? Because you're going to wound the animal. You can use the wooden comb that has a bit thicker teeth. Okay, there's less likely that you're going to injure the animal there, and the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what the machloket between them is. Chachamim say no, you can't do this or that. You can't do either. Okay, so says the Gemara now. The Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah chada para havyale. Right, what did the Mishnah say? The first detail was about the cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It said parator she Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah yotzeh b'rotzua sheben karnea. So from that language, it sounds like it means that Rabbi Elazar had one cow. Okay, so says the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah chada para havyale. He only had one cow. What are you talking about? V'amarav v'amri lamar Amarav. Tlei saralfei egle hava me'aser Rabbi Elazariah ben Azariah me'edrei hoshata v'shata. Meaning that it was 12,000 cows that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would separate every year as his meiser. Meaning he had 30. Sorry, what did I say? Tleisa, right? Is 13,000. 13,000 cows. That was his maaser be'ema. So he had many more than one. Tosfot do point out by the way, they say Tleisa ofei egle hava maaser Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It says v'teima Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah haya achar churban abayit tuva. Meaning Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lived after the churban. Tosfot does here a whole cheshbon as to how we know that. Rabban Gamliel haya nasi kodem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabban Gamliel haya lachar b'churban habayit. It says Rabban Gamliel was the nasi before Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and he was after the churban habayit. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai haya oseh takanot miyad lachar churban habayit. Mishum Rabban Gamliel lo הגיעו ימיו להיות נשיא. כדמה משכב בית המקדש התקין רבי יוחנן בן זכאי ואחר כך רבן גמליאל ואחר כך רבי אלעזר. In other words, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai made takanot. We know about Zechel HaMikdash, many different takanot. So he was the Nasi after the Churban, and then after him was Rabban Gamliel, and after him was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So he was well after the Churban. Right, so Tosfot says Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ואחר כך רבן גמליאל ואחר כך רבי אלעזר. רבי אלעזר לא היה כי אם בן 18 שנה כשהיה נשיא ונשיאותו לאחר חורבן. We know the whole story from the Haggadah של Pesach. Right, but Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was 18 years old when he was appointed the Nasi, and that was after Churban. Now, so why does that bother us? The Gemara in Bechorot says, the whole practice of Maser Behema was cancelled after the Churban. So what do you mean? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was separating, giving off 13,000 cows from his flock for Maser Behema every year, but there was no Maser Behema at that time. So what does it mean? So Tosfos says three answers, three possibilities. Number one, he says, Yesh lomar, the lo nitbatel altar kim lachar zman. It could be that when it was cancelled, not immediately, but after a certain period of time, after the Churban, only then was the Maser Beima stopped. Inami apotropos Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah shaya b'mei habayit haya maser. Or maybe this is talking about when he was a young kid and he had his apotropos, somebody was looking after him who would separate separate on his behalf. Inami lav dafka maser shelo ela shaya noten lamelech b'chol shana ha'asirit. Okay, in other words, it doesn't mean necessarily literally the maser, but it's talking about there was maybe a sort of a tax that he would give to the king. Either way, what the Gemara is trying to emphasize is that he had many, many animals and not just one. So the language of the Mishnah is strange that it says Paratosh Rabbi Elazar. We know that he had far more. So the answer is actually that even this wasn't his. So it says the Gemara like this. It says Tana lo shelo haita ela shel shchento haita. This was not actually Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's cow at all, the one that went out with this ritzua between its horns. That was the cow of his neighbor. That was somebody else's. Umitoch shelo michaba nikret al shmo. However, since Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the Nasi. If he had said something, so she would have stopped. But the fact that he didn't protest, the fact that he didn't say anything, so then he gave his approval, so that shows that that's called as if it was his. Right? Somebody else did it. You did it, somebody else did it. It doesn't matter. You had the opportunity to stop it, you had the opportunity to get involved, and you didn't. Then that is then that's considered as if you did it. So that's a big lesson over there. But the point is that he didn't do anything because seemingly he thought that it was mutar, whereas Chachamim thought that it was asur. Okay, so that was case number one. Case number two, we said makadrinat b'ema b'yom tov. So says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, ezu kirud ve'ezu kirtzuf. This is what Rashi explained to us already, but it says kirud ktanim v'osin chabura, kirtzuf gdolim ve'ein osin chabura. So different types of combs. Kerud refers to the smaller type of comb with the finer teeth that's going to inflict a wound. Essentially, when you comb, and the kirtzuf is this larger one. Ve'enos in chabula. V'gimel machlokot b'davas. There are three opinions here. There's a three-way machloket amongst the Tanaim. Gimel machlokot b'davar. Rabbi Yehuda savar davar she'eno mitkaven asur. Okay, so this is going to be, since there are three opinions, going to depend on two different parameters. But the first is, we all know, we discussed it between Min Chamarav as well, we all know there's a famous machloket in Shabbos between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon about davar she'eno mitkaven. Okay, we're not getting into psik reisha now, that's a different topic. But davar she'eno mitkaven, meaning if I don't intend to do something, but the malacha happens, and this, by the way, is a halacha not just in Chod Shabbat and Yom Tov, but throughout the Torah, we have the concept of davar she'eno mitkaven. So Rabbi Yehuda says that davar she'eno mitkaven is asur, and Rabbi Shimon says that davar she'eno mitkaven is mutar. That's the one famous machloket in Chod Shabbat between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. It's another famous machloket between them about malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, but that's not our topic for now. But if you just have a look at the last Rashi on the Amud, the last Rashi of Rabbi Shimon, will come to that later. But he quotes as Damar, quotes the Gemara in Shabbat. This is where the source of this machloket is. Gorer Adam mita kisev safsal to davar she'eno mitkaven mutar. The classic example is a person drags a bed, a chair, a bench. You drag it along the ground, and essentially you're making a ditch in the ground when you drag this big heavy object. By making a ditch in the ground, that is the malacha of choresh, that is plowing. So according to Rabbi Shimon, you can do that because you don't intend to plow, you intend to move the object. So that's fine. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I don't care what you intend to do, I care what you do. And you did it. So therefore, so that is Rabbi Yehuda says that's so. So now to plug this all into our machloket over here. Again, back in the Gemara, about 5 lines before the wide lines. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that a davar she'eino mitkaven is forbidden. So it doesn't matter whether I intend to injure the animal or not. I'm going to create a chabura that's going to be asur. However, miu kirut ktanim vosin chabura. Okay, so therefore he says you cannot use this finer comb, this kerud you cannot do because that's going to make a chabura. Kiutzuf gdolim ve'enosin chabura. When it comes to kiutzuf for this wooden comb, right, that is not going to injure the animal. So fine, so therefore that is mutar. And he says lo gazrin and kiutzuf atu kerud. So you might have thought that you can't use the big comb, which won't injure the animal, because as a gzeira, because if you use the big comb, you might come to use the small comb, and then you might come to cause a chabura, even though you didn't intend to. So Rabbi Yehuda does not take it that far. Rabbi Yehuda does not say we have to be gozer for that. So that is opinion number one. For Rabbanan, secondly, Rabbanan Savri Namik Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan here also hold like Rabbi Yehuda in that what? Davar she'eino mitkaven asur, and that also a davar she'eino mitkaven is asur. V'gazrin and kiltzuf atu kerud, but they also they gozer. They say therefore you can't use the small comb because of it will injure the animal, and that's davar she'eino mitkaven. And you can't use the large comb because then you might come to use the small comb. Okay, that's the machloket between Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we're in the wide lines now in the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah savalak Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said everything here is mutar. He holds like Rabbi Shimon. Tamar davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. Right, I'm allowed to. So then, obviously, there would be no gzeira because neither of them are actually inherently forbidden. Because the davar she'eino mitkaven mutar, uben kerud uben kitzuf shari, and therefore it is allowed. So who do we pasken now? Kamar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, ve'Amar Rav Nachman nechudei. So Rav Nachman. Rava says the name of Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, and there are those who say that it was Rav Nachman who said it himself. Halacha k'Rabbi Shimon. She'arei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah modelo. He says, so we have a proof from here that again, when it comes to davar she'eino mitkaven, who do we pasken like Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon? He says we have a proof from here that we pasken like Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because she'arei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah modelo, because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds like him. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah paskens like him. Amale Rava le Rav Nachman v'leima amar halacha Rabbi Yehuda shechachamim modim lo. Rava says, what kind of a proof is that? You can say over here in our Mishnah, yes, that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds like Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbanan hold like Rabbi Yehuda. So how do you prove it? And more so, it's a strong argument because we generally say Yachid v'Rabim. Halacha Rabim, right? If I have a lone opinion versus a majority opinion, I go like Rabim. So that's Chachamim here. So how does that help? What kind of a proof is it to say that it holds like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Therefore, we pass like Rabbi Shimon. So it says the Gemara now. Amalei anak Rabbi Shimon svirale. What he meant to say was the following. I'm not saying. Rav Nachman is saying like this. I'm not saying that halacha follows Rabbi Shimon because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds like him. I'm saying halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. We have a machlok with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. I hold like Rabbi Shimon. I hold that davar she'eino mitkaven is mutar. Rabbi Shimon is correct, right? Ana Rabbi Shimon svirali ve'od, and as a furthermore, sharei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah modelo. It happens to be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah agrees as well, but that's not the proof. That's more of like just adding on. Once we already established that is how we hold. Halacha l'maaseh, we know that we do pasken like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to davar she'eino mitkaven. So certainly in Hilchot Shabbat we say when davar she'eino mitkaven is mutar, not just in Hilchot Shabbat, in other areas as well. The exception to the rule, as I mentioned, what the Gemara in Shabbat in many places talks about is psik reisha, right? Where we say that davar she'eino mitkaven is only going to be allowed where I don't intend to do something, but it may or may not happen, right? So if I'm dragging something on the ground, whereby it may cause a ditch, but it may not cause a ditch, depending on how the ground is, depending on how heavy the table is, etc. So that would be mutar. But if it's definitely going to happen, that's what's called the psik reisha. Psik reisha means cut off the head, because in the days of the Gemara, they would play football with the heads of a chicken. That's what they would. That was the toy that they had. They would. So if a person says person wants to cut off the head of the chicken and just wants to use it as a toy, but they don't intend to kill the chicken, right? So it's davar she'eino mitkaven. I'm just, I'm not trying to do the malacha of shchita. I just want to have that. So no. So says the Gemara, psik reisha v'lo yamut. You're going to cut off its head. It's not going to die. Obviously, it's going to die. You can't get away from that. So you can't argue that eino mitkaven when something is definitely going to happen, and then it's psik reisha. And then, as we discussed the other day, right, there are all different chilukim in the Rishonim, as psik reisha d'oraita, psik reisha d'rabanan, psik reisha d'lo nichale, psik reisha d'lo ichpatle. All these, it was very interesting, by the way. All these chilukim, all these distinctions are not actually found in the Gemara. They come along in the Rishonim, and certain Rishonim accept them, and certain Rishonim don't accept them. But the concept of it's based on the fact that there is a stira between certain sugyas, and it's not clear as to why in a certain case psik reisha would be allowed, and in a certain case psik reisha would not be allowed. So the Rishonim say, there's a difference between a psik reisha where you are happy with the outcome or where you are not happy with the outcome, where you're interested in the outcome or you're not interested in the outcome. That is a whole topic in and of itself. All right, let's move on to the next amud, round kaf gimel amud bet. Okay, working our way towards the end of the second parak. So now the Mishnah says, we mentioned rechaim shel pilpelim. We mentioned the grinding peppers in the previous Mishnah. So now the Mishnah says, rechaim shel pilpelim tme'a mishum shlosha kelim. Mishum klei kibul, mishum klei matechad, and mishum klei kvara. This Mishnah tells us a little bit about tuman tara. So you have the kli, you have the rechaim, which you use to grind the peppers, and it says this is a kli which is makabel tum'ah. This is a kli which accepts tum'ah, mishum shlosha kelim. In fact, it's actually three separate kelim, says the Mishnah. You have a kli kibul, where the things would go into. You have a kli matechet, and you have a kli kfara, sort of the net woven part of it, where you would grind the peppers. And the point in telling us that it's three different kelim, says Rashi, says Tmea mishum shlosha kelim, makabelet tumah al shem shloshet kelim. Nafkamina de'i nami azel chad shma mina. In other words, if one of the part of the kli was broken, generally speaking, a kli would only be makabel tumah if it's whole, but if it's broken, then it won't be makabel tumah. So if part of this kli was broken, nonetheless, tmeya mishum idach. It's considered three separate kelim, and therefore it would still be makabel tumah. In this instance, says the Gemara Tana tachtona mishum klei kibul. Just explain what are the different parts of this utensil. The bottom part is a klei kibul, has a receptacle, and that would be makabel tumah. Imtzait mishum klei kvara. The middle part is this woven thing together, which would also be makabel tumah. And the Elyonah, the top part, mishum klei matechet, because of clay that is considered a klei matechet. That's considered metal, even though it's not actually made of metal, but it's coated in metal, and that's the most important part, and therefore that's considered a klei, which would be makabel tumah. So moving on, the next Mishnah is going to talk about some other issues to
So I have a quick question. These three parts, are they connected to each other?
Yes.
So they are connected to each other. Okay.
I think so. I think they are connected, and then therefore that's. But the point is, so Rashi was telling us that if it was to break, we still view them as three independent parts. Okay. So now says the Mishnah as follows: it says agala shel katan tmeya midras v'nitelet b'shabbat ve'ina nigreret ela al gabei kelim. Okay, so we have an agala shel katan. We have a sort of a wagon, sort of toy that a young child will play with. So the Mishnah tells us three things about it. It says, number one, it's tmeya midras. Number two, it's nitela b'shabbat. Number three, enani greret el al gabei kelim. So tmeya midras, there are different types of tum'ah. Tmeat midras is a very severe form of tum'ah, whereby if somebody would sit or would lean on the object, that's enough to give it to make it tameh. So generally speaking, tumat midras is for things like the general way would be to sit or to lean on them. So since this agala, one would sit in it, the katan would sit in it, therefore it is tamet midras. Okay, nitelet b'Shabbat, you're allowed to carry it on Shabbat. It's not considered muktzeh. It's not considered muktzeh. Ve'einani greret el al gabei kelim. If you want to drag it on the ground, so you can't drag it directly on the ground on Shabbat, but only on top of kelim. Just have a look at Rashi where he says el al gabei kelim. It says al gabei begadim. As we've mentioned a number of times, kelim refers to clothes. When you drag it, you're going to do it, right? We've mentioned the case of the gorem mitas safsal in terms of enomit kaven. So over here, if you're going to drag this agala, you're going to make a ditch on the ground. But if you put clothes down or something and then you drag it on top, then you're not making a ditch. So that would be permitted. Now Rabbi Yehuda Omer says the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol hakelim ein nigrarin. Chutz min ha'agala. Rabbi Yehuda says all kelim, all different objects, you cannot drag on the ground. Remember, that makes sense. That's Rabbi Yehuda who says davar she'eino mitkaven is asur. So he says you can't do that except for this agala mipnei shehi koveshet. Koveshet means what? It conquers. Koveshet means that it goes on top of the ground, but it doesn't actually make a ditch. Rashi explains. Chalitz. It doesn't dig into the ground. It kind of goes on top of the ground and just sort of moves the dirt that way, but it's not going to cause an actual ditch and uproot the dirt on the ground, and therefore it doesn't actually move the dirt, and therefore it's allowed. So says the Gemara now, okay, this tumat midrash turns it. I didn't mention, but it's a very severe form of tumah in the sense that it's going to turn the object into an ava tumah as well. But that is because you lean on it. You lean on it in order to play with it. Okay. V'nitele b'Shabbat mishum de'ikat Torat kli ala. It's carried on Shabbat. It's not muktzeh. It's considered a kli. You use it for playing with, etc. V'einani greret al gabei kelim. So he said you can't drag it on the ground except on top of clothes, on top of other objects, not on the ground directly. Right? Kelim in, al gabei kelim in, al gabei kalka lo. You can carry it, you can drag it on top of kelim, but you cannot drag it on top of the ground directly. So my tama, what is the reason for that? Deka avid charetz. Because you're making a ditch, because this is similar to the case of Gorin Mitaki Sev Safsal, the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in Masechet Shabbat, that it's part of plowing. So now says the Gemara, hang on. So if that's the case, meaning you can't drag it on the what's going to be the issue? We're saying you can't drag when you drag it on the ground, you're making a ditch. What did we say in the Gemara Masechet Shabbat? We said other items, are you allowed to drag them on the ground even though you might make a ditch? We said, well, it depends. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can, because he says davar she'eino mitkaven is mutar. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't, because it's asur, because it's davar she'eino mitkaven. So here also, it would be davar she'eino mitkaven, right? When you're dragging this agala on the ground. So the Mishnah said you can't drag the agala on the ground. You have to drag it on top of kelim. So says the Gemara Mani. So whose opinion is that? That must be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda davar she'eino mitkaven asur, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says davar she'eino mitkaven asur. The Rabbi Shimon hamar davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. Right, and it's a strong question, yeah, because not only did Rabbi Shimon say davar she'eino mitkaven mutar, but Rabbi Shimon gave basically the same example. Okay. The Tanya. Rabbi Shimon Omer gorer adam mitaki sev safsal ubilvad shelo yitkaven lasot charitz. So long as you aren't intending to make a ditch. Okay, so that seems very, very clear that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. What's the problem? The problem is if you read the rest of the Mishnah, it says this is not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So Eima Seifa, look at the Seifa, look at the continuation, look at what the Mishnah then says. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Ein hakol nigrin b'Shabbat, right? Chutz min ha'agala mipnei shehi koveshet. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda said, all right, the order's changed. In our Mishnah, we said Rabbi Yehuda Omer kol hakelim ein nigrarin, and so you have to Rabbi Yehuda ein hakol nigrin, but it's the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda says ein hakol nigrin b'Shabbat, meaning you are not allowed to drag items on the floor on Shabbat. Chutz min ha'agala, only the agala you're allowed to drag. Mipnei shehi koveshet, Mneshe koveshet in. Aval charetz lo. Since the zagala is not actually going to make a ditch, but it's just going to go on top of the ground, so that isn't going to dig in a little bit, but it's not really going to uproot the dirt. So therefore, that is fine. So hang on. So our Mishnah says that you can't drag this agala on the ground, directly on the ground. You can only do it on top of kalim. Why? We explained in the Gemara, must be because you might make a ditch. And then Rabbi Yehuda says you can't drag anything on the ground because you'll make a ditch, but this you can. But we said the only way we understand the ratio of the Mishnah is if it's according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that it's a no mitkaven. But Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly that you can do it. So what's going on? That's the machloket. That's the stira. So says the Gemara, Trei Tanai Valibad Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so these are two different Tanaim, two different opinions in Tanai as to what both of them say that this is Rabbi Yehuda. It doesn't make sense if you say it's not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but they're arguing as to what Rabbi Yehuda would say regarding this agala. We know for sure that Rabbi Yehuda holds that davar she'no mitkaven is asur. Look at Rashi. It says, Trei Tanai v'alibad Rabbi Yehuda. It's two Tanaim according to Rabbi Yehuda. Chad savar ha'agala nami kishal kelim. Doseh chalitz b'gleil rata. One Tana holds that Rabbi Yehuda thinks that the agala is exactly the same as any other kli, because sometimes it is going to make a ditch when you drag it. Shebamim she'ena ofen mitgalgel v'nigral v'chofel. Right, because sometimes it's going to go, the wheel's not going to, it's not going to roll so well, and therefore you're going to drag it along, and it's going to dig into the ground. Vidach savar, but the other Tana holds what? Lo shachiach, no, that's not going to happen so often, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned for that. Lo shachiachi ve'ena ela koveshet tachat gilgula. We just assume when you're dragging, when the wheels are just rolling on the ground, then that would be okay. That's why nowadays, right? If you have an agala, you have a pram, whatever, you can wheel it along over the dirt, etc. We're not concerned that you're going to make a ditch either. Okay, Hadran alach Yom Tov. That's the end of the second perek of Beitzah. We will Be'ezrat Hashem continue next week, beginning with the third of Perek Ein Sadin.
Hadran alach Yom Tov.
Thank you very much.
Good day, everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Let's go for B'sorot Tovot.
Amen.